I'm super excited to be able to introduce someone and a team who have been following this theme and doing some amazing work on really interrogating what this means for humanity. So get ready for an amazing multimedia, immersive performance. And please welcome to the stage, Zeg, Coda, legend, Isobel, Cockerell.
Stand here. In April last year, a freak flood hit the city of Dubai. Christopher Wylie, better known as the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, was supposed to be meeting me in Europe to work on a new project together. But he found himself trapped in Dubai as a storm ravaged the desert city. Trapped alongside him were thousands of tech bros, Silicon Valley venture capitalists, crypto millionaires, TikTok influencers, and biohackers. And there was nothing to do but wait out the storm and have a party. Chris and I FaceTimed through it.
As you're wading through like knee-deep water, people are screaming everywhere. And then what do all these like bros do? They organize a party. It's like the world is collapsing outside, and yet you go inside, and it's like billionaires and centimillionaires having a party. Can't get electricity? That's fine. We bought a generator. It's nuts. And I feel like Dubai right now is a microcosm of the world. The world is collapsing outside, and the people are partying.
I was at a journalism conference at the time, and every few hours my phone was pinging with messages and voice notes from Chris, sending dispatches secretly from the middle of these parties.
Okay, so I don't know if you can hear me. I'm in the toilet at this event, and it's interesting because people here, they're talking about longevity, how to live, like, if not for a long time, how to live forever, but also prepping, how to prepare for when people revolt and when society gets completely undermined. And the thing that I think about is you have in another part of the world a bunch of journalists talking about how to save democracy. And here you've got a bunch of tech guys, tech bros, thinking about how to live past democracy and survive.
You might remember Chris as the guy with pink hair who blew the whistle on Cambridge Analytica in 2018. He kickstarted a massive controversy about what Facebook was doing with our data. And that voice note Chris sent me was the beginning of a year-long investigation that we worked on together, and it resulted in a podcast called Captured. We wanted to understand what's really going on inside the tech world, how we're being captured by big tech, and how we can fight back. So, of course, we went to Silicon Valley, the land of the true believers. San Francisco is a pretty mind-blowingly weird place in so many ways. But we started where so much of this sort of behind-the-scenes work is done, 15,000 kilometers away from Silicon Valley, in the informal settlements in Kenya. This is where we found the people who play an invisible but crucial part in the development of AI. Nairobi's poorest neighborhoods are home to the armies of click workers who relentlessly train and correct AI models until they finally learn something. This is where we met Mercy Chimwani. She lives with her family in this half-finished house on the outskirts of Nairobi. There's mud beneath our feet, and the unfinished stairs lead up to a gaping hole where you can see the rain clouds above. When it rains, the water runs straight down and right through the house.
This is like the sitting, at the same time the bedroom.
So how many sleep in here?
My sister, my 2 kids, and my mom. We have 2 beds. Then the kids, they sleep on one bed, my mom and my sister, and then me, I usually sleep here. Yeah.
And you worked for, who did you work for?
Meta.
You heard that right. Mercy, who lives in this half-built house, sharing a room with 4 other people, used to work for Meta. She was a content moderator, and it was her job to look at the most horrific content on the internet so that you and I don't have to see them. She was training Meta's AI systems to automatically filter out that content for us. And she was so traumatized by what she saw that she couldn't sleep. For this, she was paid about $1 an hour.
They are telling you they will pay you a little bit higher compared to what you were earning before. Then you are like, oh no, here it is. You could see people committing suicide live. I also saw a video of a very young kid being raped live, and you're here, you have to watch this content. You have kids, you are thinking about them, and here you are at work. You have to deal with that content. You have to remove it from the platform. So you can imagine all that piling in within one person, how hard it is.
People like Mercy, they're not just training social media algorithms. In Kenya, we also met people who were training ChatGPT how to avoid giving answers that include things like child abuse or rape. And the way they had to do that was to spend hour after hour reading this vile material and telling ChatGPT, this collection of words equals child abuse, this collection of words equals rape. This is a sausage factory that makes artificial intelligence. Every major tech company does this, and they don't want you to know about it. They make everyone sign non-disclosure agreements to try to stop them from talking about what they do and how they're treated.
They were like, now, just that you have signed, just know from today henceforth, you are not supposed to mention to anyone the kind of job you are doing, the nature of job that you are doing.
We're told to believe that AI is almost like a magic trick, one that will seamlessly solve all of our problems. Meanwhile, we're supposed to look away from the fact that some of the poorest, most vulnerable people in the world are being traumatized in the name of making our lives more convenient. If you go to San Francisco, you get a sense of what that convenience might look like. You glide from your self-driven car to your tech campus before you're driven home to your temperature-controlled smart house. In one enormous upmarket tech bro frat house called the AGI House, which stands for the Artificial General Intelligence House, we went to a 50-man hackathon, and yeah, they were pretty much all men. We took our shoes off at the door, and we went in to meet, like everyone else, and we went in to meet these machine learning CEOs and humanoid robot developers. They talk about a future with artificial intelligence as a utopia, a place where we never have to work, where suffering will end, where robots do everything for us. This is me and Chris with the founder of AGI House, Jeremy Nixon. Jeremy told us what he's most excited about when it comes to AI: access to all knowledge in our own brains.
So say in the next decade, we invent brain-computer interfaces, and I can basically have read and write access from my neurons, direct from, say, a neural network.
So putting stuff into your head as well.
Yeah, so you could have all of the knowledge that, GPT-4 has about a subject, like real-time, on the fly, comprehensive knowledge of everything that you're interacting with.
So if, like me, that went completely over your head, Jeremy is basically saying that he wants to install artificial intelligence into every human. His dream is to never have to Google anything again because we'll just be able to access all that information directly in our heads via a chip. We met one of Jeremy's roommates too, a guy called Kyle Morris. Kyle is part of a growing trend in Silicon Valley of people who want to live forever.
By the time I'm 60, I plan on kind of like retrofitting my body with like different parts and like replacing organs, limbs. I want to assume that there will be continued progress and then kind of bank my life around that.
Kyle's working on the theory that future advances in technology will allow him to become immortal. He's trying to slow down his aging process as much as he can to be in the best possible shape to take advantage of future technological progress. Part of what he's doing is taking huge numbers, like 70 dietary supplements a day. He showed me his daily routine. So what have we got here?
It's basically a whole set of like supplements that help with longevity and energy. The metrics I optimize for are like mental energy, clarity, decision making. Because the way I see it is any given day, my job is effectively to make 2 or 3 decisions and then work a number of hours.
So you're kind of optimizing for these specific set of goals? Like...
Yeah. I'm basically a brain with limbs. The brain is the valuable part. The rest is kind of undifferentiated.
So this one's called L-tyrosine, and it says neurotransmitter support. Healthy glandular function supports mental alertness. How old are you?
I'm, 28. Just turned 28.
And you want to stay 28, preferably?
Yeah, ideally, like, I want to be alive long enough that I can preserve myself and I'm not past an age where I'm unable to use the technology that will allow me to live forever.
If you're like Kyle and Jeremy, you believe that AI is going to build us a fabulous future, giving us access to godlike levels of intelligence and the possibility of living forever. So if you're like them, it's crucial that you push ahead with the AI revolution and you don't get bogged down by questions about accountability or, God forbid, regulation. During our time in Silicon Valley, we went to barbecues in the heart of Palo Alto and Cupertino. We talked to investors and tech evangelists who believe that we have to move as fast as possible to be the world leaders in AI, or we risk losing out to other countries like China. We got talking to a tech investor and former chief technology officer for a bunch of huge companies. His name is Alan Bain.
We have to be worried about people are going to over-regulate it. Europe is the worst, to be honest with you. Let's look at how we can benefit the society and how this can help lead the world, as opposed to trying to hold it back.
Some people might say that, like, the reason we have democratically elected governments is so that they can put controls on things, so that they can keep us safe. And ultimately, they should be the ones deciding whether we regulate, not the people in this barbecue.
You sound like you're from Sweden. I'm sorry. That's social democracy. That is not what we are here in the U.S. This country is based on a constitution. We're not based on everybody being equal and holding people back. No, we're not in Sweden.
We're an American barbecue.
Yes.
So how should we think about AI? How should we live with it? And how can we find agency in a future that feels like it's being decided for us by a handful of extraordinarily rich and powerful people? I want to welcome my co-pilot on the podcast, Christopher Wylie, to join me on the stage to figure that out. This is the first time we're seeing each other, which is nice, on stage. How are you?
Jet lagged, yes. Surviving.
So I guess I want to kind of take us back to when we met, because at that stage it was just over a year ago, and it had been 7 years since you blew the whistle on Cambridge Analytica, and Chris came to my house in London, and we sat in the garden and kind of talked about what had happened since you blew the whistle.
You made me an oat milk latte.
How passé, oat milk is so over.
Yeah.
And we kind of talked about what it means to like put everything on the line to blow the whistle on Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. And then really the only upshot was that these massive, powerful companies just got more powerful and hired a few more lobbyists, or quite a lot more lobbyists. And you talked about this thing about how there's a sort of hubris in being a whistleblower. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you meant by that.
To be a whistleblower? You kind of have to really understand that you're right and they're wrong and take everything that comes with it. Essentially being able to either not be able to read the room or read the room and ignore it and just say the uncomfortable thing that people don't want to hear.
I feel like, as a journalist, actually Ed Caesar was talking about this earlier in a panel. He talked about how it sounds unusual, but for him, sort of impact and outcome is not the modus operandi for him. He's not really in the game of journalism to necessarily change the world, but because he believes that these stories should be told and that they're important in their own right. And being a whistleblower is kind of the opposite. You're like in it for results. And how do you feel, you know, about the fact that these companies are more powerful than ever after you put everything on the line?
You're in it for results, but you're also in it to be truthful. So, I mean, I think a lot of whistleblowers, I don't think by coincidence, are queer people who themselves have experience coming out in some kind of form and telling uncomfortable truths so that they can live the rest of their lives in a more truthful fashion. I think that when you are a whistleblower, of course, like you want some kind of result to happen, but you also want to stop living a lie. Yeah. It feels, before coming out as a whistleblower, it does feel closeting when you have this knowledge and you want to be able to tell people, you want to be able to speak freely about it, but there's powers that be that are telling you you can't. You have to be this way and you have to pretend in front of everyone.
That's such an interesting analogy, the idea of being closeted and then coming out. I've not heard that one before, and it's such a vulnerable idea. And I wonder, you know, before you came out as a whistleblower, what were you expecting was going to happen, and how did it differ from the reality of what went on after you blew the whistle?
Well, I think the first thing is I think very naively thought when you have a bunch of information and you go and, you know, disclose it to like someone in the government, that there's going to be, you know, kind of like on TV, you know, there's some guy in a room and he's got a plan, he knows what to do, right? You hand it over to the police, they'll take it from there. And the thing that I really, really came to understand very personally was no one had a clue. Like, I dealt with, in the UK, the National Crime Agency, in the US, like the FBI, you know, the intelligence community, all kinds of people in the government, journalists, you know, at the top, you know, New York Times, The Guardian, you know, Wall Street Journal, all these. I remember having to just explain what disinformation was, right? Not even all the AI technical stuff, right? I remember explaining time and time again, what is disinformation? It's a word now that we all use, but at the time, like, no one understood it. And going and, you know, being interviewed by the FBI, for example, and really about cybercrimes, and really having to explain to them something as basic as what is a relational database and how cloud computing works. When they ask, where is it? Where is the data? And you kind of have to explain, like, it's sort of it depends on where the servers are. It can be anywhere. And that's when I really realized that, like, okay, if this is the level of understanding of our government, like, we've got a lot of work to do to build up our capacity in order to challenge this sort of grab for power that you see from Silicon Valley.
So there's sort of this idea of the insider and the outsider, and I mean, I think you'll be the first to say, like, that you're a tech bro, right? Like,
well, in order to be a whistleblower, you generally have to be an insider,
right,
to then go outside.
Right. And now it's quite interesting because you kind of inhabit this insider-outsider kind of perspective where you spend a lot of time with journalists. We hung out together for a year. We did this podcast together. And yet you're also on the inside of these parties. And I mean, how is it to kind of navigate that world? Because it's actually a fairly unique position to be in. And what's it been like, especially recently, to kind of be the sort of whiplash of navigating those two worlds and the disconnect between the two? What's kind of struck you during that journey?
I think existing between multiple worlds, like, again, as a queer person, that's what you do every single day. You're constantly code switching and making sure people are comfortable with how you're presenting and all of that. But then you might go to a different space and you can act out in however you want. So for me, living between sort of tech brodom and being able to speak and hang out with like, very jocular engineers, and then go and meet with journalists and talking about human rights. It's just another set of code switching that you just have to sort of learn to adapt to. It's unfortunate though that these two worlds don't really interact with one another though, because I think what makes me so fearful about the future is that I see how little tech bros think about things like human rights or colonialism or just like understanding basic history of what humans do to one another and the history of technological advances and how those are often used initially to dominate other people. But then on the flip side, listening and talking to journalists who like also don't talk to the engineers themselves and sort of sit in a circle talking about human rights and democracy and whether or not ChatGPT should be used to write an article. When you go and see what the engineers are building and how just like these two things are so disconnected from one another. And it's a real shame because I think that if there was more interfacing between all these different worlds, you would develop a more common understanding of what is our capacity, what are we actually building, but what are the problems with that and what should we avoid?
Yeah, I remember one really striking moment from when we were in the AGI house, and I don't know if you remember this, but basically they were talking about, and let me know if I get the lingo wrong, but they were talking about how to make AI use less compute power. And one of the things that they talked about was, as a sort of aside, was, obviously all of these data centers, they use a lot of energy, and the companies love to talk about how it's sustainable energy, but we all know they all run off natural gas predominantly, and that's expensive. And it wasn't, there was sort of a climate issue was sort of thrown away, but it wasn't like at all a concern. People were just like, yeah, it's run off natural gas. It's not really. And then I spoke to that guy afterwards, and he was like, yeah, but we'll fix the climate. We're going to fix it with tech. So we're not really thinking about it that much.
It's exactly that is the issue because they don't talk to other people. So there's the, it's now I think called techno-solutionism, this sort of idea that you can technology your way out of every problem, which is incredibly naive. I think you can't tech your way out of a human rights issue. You can't tech your way out of a climate issue. It's incredibly arrogant, but they're never challenged on it and they're never presented an alternative viewpoint because the reason that guy was telling you that is because that's what he hears from his VC, right? Oh, don't worry about it. Like, we're investing in this other climate tech thing and we'll solve climate change in 10 years.
We'll geoengineer it.
Yeah, we'll just engineer our way out of it. And, whatever. If that fails, Elon's got a plan to get us to Mars.
Yeah, so, Planet B.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
But I think, my experience with engineers, and I think you maybe saw this as well in your sort of little dabbling in these spaces as well, is that there are a lot of very well-meaning people. Not every person who works in tech or becomes an engineer wants to undermine the world.
Right.
It's just that they aren't put in a space where they're forced to confront what they're actually doing. These are people that I think in the large part are good people, but they're not confronted, and they should be. There should be more friction on a day-to-day basis with all these engineers.
Right, for example, the problem of, the story that we just told of Mercy and her experience in Kenya, working essentially as in these horrific conditions with no support and no mental health support, paid $1 an hour. What would be the tech bros answer to that? We visited, what's their answer?
I've actually talked to people who've listened to that and found it shocking.
So they
had no idea. No idea. They're like, oh, we got our data from Scale AI, and they have people do it. I didn't know that this is what they were doing. And I think this is the real issue.
It kind of speaks to this idea that I think a lot of us have, and it's not just tech bros. I think I mentioned it earlier, this, and it was something we came across a lot in Silicon Valley, of this idea that AI is kind of like a magic trick, right? It's like this thing that exists in our phones, and we don't quite know how it got there, and we don't quite know how it's built, but it's like, it's magic, and it can answer all our problems for us. And then, what it hides is this like very brute force kind of almost
There's
very analog
so many people
process.
involved.
There's so many people.
And this is also where I think some of the discourse around the AI issue is problematic, because we spend so much time focusing on what should we do about Mark Zuckerberg, rather than the thousands and thousands of engineers that are constantly constructing and reconstructing all of these problematic technologies themselves, who probably are easier to get to because I would argue that a lot of them have a greater moral compass than someone like Mark Zuckerberg.
In terms of this idea that it's magic, or that, you know, perhaps we're building God, you know, these are some ideas that we came across in Silicon Valley, that we're building this all-knowing, all-powerful being that essentially is going to solve all of our problems, that will mean that we'll never have to work or toil again, and that will essentially propel us into heaven, propel us into the stars, and hack our way back into paradise, you know. And what we came across in Silicon Valley, I wonder if you can describe, because it does feel like something is shifting in Silicon Valley, and it's not just the sort of this race towards AI, but there's a kind of mindset that is infecting people there. I wonder if you would go that far.
And when you actually go there, because when I bring this up in public, or when I talk to people and I, you know, say I think it's a cult, and people kind of go, oh yeah, like yeah, it's kind of like cult-like.
Just say that again. Yeah, you think it's a cult.
That I think it's a cult. Yeah.
Because that's quite an intense thing to say.
That you know, or that there's some kind of quasi-religious movement that's being, you know, or maybe religion's not the right word for it, but some kind of spirituality is forming. But when you actually go and like, or listen to what some of these people say, it's just in your face. And this is also, when we talk about like a disconnect, right? It's not just that these engineers are disconnected from the rest of the world. The world is disconnected from what's going on in this weird, weird place that is building our future with these weird ideas about like living forever and perfecting ourselves and then integrating with a machine and a super intelligence in like really, I think like juvenile or ways. Like when something that I noticed when we were going around and talking to a lot of these engineers was that this idea that knowledge is the most important thing rather than experience, right? That, you know, when Jeremy was talking about, oh, we should be able to like just upload everything into your head, and kind of asking the question, well, but being a human is about experiencing things, and also like simply knowing something is not enough for you to be able to be wise, to act on things. All these people who then live like in this brutal way where they take 1,000 supplements, they don't eat, they work out, they sleep at certain times, they're like, you know, doing weird blood transfusions, going into hyperbaric chamber, they're not living.
Right.
They're not living. They want to live forever, but they're not even living. They're not experiencing life, they're not living life, and there's this sort of like weird thing going on where these guys just like don't understand what it is to even be like human, how to live life well.
Right, I mean, one of my favorite...
And it's because they don't engage with the rest of the world, but the world doesn't come to them either.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's that sort of idea of this kind of vacuum-sealed world that they live in. And I think one of my friend's favorite quotes from the podcast, or favorite moments in the podcast, is when Kyle talks about how, you know, I ask him if what they're aiming for is a sort of heaven with sort of singularity. And he said, oh, well, I don't know if heaven would have everything I want. And I'm actually kind of in heaven right now doing my supplements and stuff, which I mean, what? It's a bizarre thing to say, but it was such a strange moment. But I think, you know, I guess maybe it's not for us to say, like, you don't know how to live, you know? That's like, their reality is that he's loving doing his supplements and microwaving his salmon and broccoli. Like, let him be, you know?
The difference is that they then want to transpose that vision of life or living well, in inverted quotes, onto the rest of society.
Right.
And this is where it becomes sort of cult-like.
Okay.
Because they're working on constructing infrastructure to put everyone into so that they can live that way too. Which is, I find it's naive, it's arrogant, it's also disturbing.
And for the people
Not realizing that the
Right.
majority of the world wants to experience life and live it, and not just sort of endure a long temporal stasis until you can integrate with a machine. That most people don't want that.
Yeah. I'm going to open it up to questions in a minute, but I guess I wanted to ask you, kind of, for people here who are maybe just coming to this subject or maybe aren't aware so much of the sort of, as you call it, which I'm not sure I'm ready to yet call it a cult, but as you call it, the cult of Silicon Valley, you know, when you think about their vision for the future and in your kind of worst fever dreams, you know, your vision of the future that they might be building, how does it look to you? Can you describe it to me?
I mean, if you take them at their words, it is the total destruction of humanity. Because when you look at the end point of transhumanism, the idea that we need to take ourselves, improve ourselves, and that our mortality is a weakness that needs to be eradicated, and that the only way to eradicate that is to integrate ourselves into silicon, into a machine, that's genocidal. Because the end point of that is we make humans redundant, and that the next iteration is going to be machines. And this is where also it becomes prophetic and cult-like, because even Kyle, he says he wants to integrate with the machine. They all want to integrate with the machine. Why? Because they see the machine as the thing that's going to replace everyone. And the future of humanity is the end of humanity and the beginning of the age of machine.
Genocidal is an incredibly strong word.
Well, what other word would we use to mean the end of humanity?
Can you say more about how you see it as, I mean, we've talked as well about eugenics as well in this world. I mean, how do you, can you talk explain a little bit more about how you mean, like how would that work? The sort of tech genocide or the transition to carbon, like how is that? Can you explain more about this idea that it's genocidal? Just help me understand.
If your end goal is first to replace all functional workers and labor with AIs, in an economic sense, render humans redundant, and then invest in technologies that allow those humans to then integrate with that wider AI consciousness, at some point, those leftover humans become redundant. And what do you do at that point? You don't have an economy anymore because they're not workers. They're dependent on the resources that you and the machines are giving them. But at some point that will stop. Because if, as Elon puts it, our goal is to spread consciousness through the universe, then these people become a resource drain on that ultimate goal of spreading consciousness through the universe, through these machines that that some of us have integrated ourselves into.
How does that track with kind of this, is it called pronatalism? You know, this idea that, you know, in a lot of people in Silicon Valley are obsessed with having as many children as possible, and the guys that we met talked about how we could potentially have 20, 100 billion people living on Earth, and, you know, they want to have trillions of people living in the universe. Surely they want, paying devil's advocate here, but surely they want to have more humans, not like end
They want to
humanity.
have more of certain types of humans.
What kind?
Ask Elon Musk.
I'm asking you.
I think when you look at pronatalists in Silicon Valley, who tend to be a certain type of very privileged white man, who is interested in creating perfected genetics in the children that they're having, so that in the transitional phase between now and this point in time where AI just completely takes over, you have a select group of humans who are capable enough of keeping up with that technology and that AI, where they are investing right now in all kinds of genetics technologies that they want to be able to use on babies, right? Genetically enhanced babies. That it is one step out from essentially a eugenics movement. And the reason they would want it is to in their eyes, perfect the current iteration of humans. And then once we've perfected them, and at that point, hopefully developed enough of a interface technology that we can then upload everybody onto the machines. We upload everybody onto the machines, and then it's end game for those left over.
Questions?
And by the way, I am not advocating for this. These are just things that people talk about in Silicon Valley. And it sounds nuts because it is, but I think that we have to take it seriously when this is common discourse amongst like the richest men in the world.
Hello.
Hi.
So my question gonna be brief. Do you consider AGI as a final boss of Great Filter?
As a final, sorry?
Do you consider AGI, artificial general intelligence, as a final boss of Great Filter?
Of a filter?
Great Filter. Have you heard about concept of Great Filter?
Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
The Great Filter is a concept which determines if civilization will survive or not.
Right.
It's a Fermi paradox why we don't
Right,
find people.
yes.
So evolution reaches a certain level of development, at which point it will get over the Great Filter and it will go on, or it is the end point.
I would hope that it doesn't come to that point, but one could argue that it may. I think when you listen to people in Silicon Valley, particularly those who sort of subscribe to this idea of transhumanism, that whether you call it a filter, whether you call it a eugenics movement, I think that there's a lot of people who wouldn't have a problem with that happening.
I think there's also this idea that we talked about a lot, which is I think when you're in Silicon Valley, you can also get trapped in this idea of AGI is going to kill us all, it's going to be the apocalypse, it's going to be the rapture, or it's going to be utopia in heaven. And when you're talking about those two ideas, it's like two poles of crazy. And what about the center? And also, what about what's happening right now? What about the way that these systems work? What about the things that we can do now? How about telling these stories now? And maybe it's not about asking, are we going to heaven or are we going to hell with AI? Maybe it's about thinking it in a more...
Well, this is literally what one of the big problems is that everyone's living in la-la lands, and it becomes distracting from actually talking about the literal realities of what AI is doing to people today, right? Which you went and saw firsthand in Kenya.
Right.
Forcing women to watch children being raped all day. That's a common feature of an AI safety training set. And I think calling out that this is cult-like and that this is bizarre is something that will become necessary in order to wake people up from this weird reality that they live in Silicon Valley.
I think the mic go over here. Yeah.
Hello. So I would be curious to know what is the underlying system of values that drives these visions. I like to put it simply in one question: why do they want to live forever? What's the purpose of being forever alive in this world, according to them? If you ever ask them this question,
I think they see dying as a form of weakness. I think they're afraid of dying. Their movement is called "Don't Die," which is bizarre. But why do they want to live forever? It does boggle my mind too. I mean, what's your answer?
I mean, I think there's a deep-seated desire in almost everyone to want to continue in some way. I mean, it's a function of ego. But I think when you listen to for example, Brian Johnson, he talks about Brian Johnson, who's the guy that's trying to live forever, and
founder of Don't Die,
founder of the Don't Die movement, injects himself with the sun's blood and all that stuff.
Injected. It doesn't work. He said it didn't work.
But he sees sort of living and consciousness as sort of the end point, the point of life is to live, and therefore, if you don't try to escape death, you are avoiding the entire point of living itself.
There was also a great
which is
line.
very circular, I know, like that to live is to live. Like, okay, great. But there is no, like, I think, yet grand thesis or sort of scripture around what is the point of everything.
Right.
The thing that I find really interesting is that you have a lot of guys who have, not to sound judgmental, but some of the most pathetic lives, who want to continue on living like that, eating supplements in hyperbaric chambers all day. And then with the end point of like becoming a computer. And I think it's become self-reinforcing, and it's because like someone hasn't like shaken them and gone, you realize how pathetic this is. This is bizarre.
Yeah, I got really into this idea that, you know, tech bros are obsessed with sci-fi, and so am I. And you know, they read a lot of their ideas, including you know, things like space travel, a lot of it comes from the Red Mars series. You know, and a lot of Elon literally put a quote from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy like on one of his rockets, which totally missed the point of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but whatever. But one of the guys that we met talked about how, you know, he feels like he's in the second novel of the trilogy of our existence, and he wants to get to the third novel. So that's one answer for you as well. I think there was a question over here with Michelle. Yeah.
Hi. So you spoke about the bros are kind of sealed, and how they don't reach out to the rest of the world, but the rest of the world doesn't reach out to them. How would one do that? Because when I saw on the clip Isobel reaching out to them and asking questions, that they just kind of shut her down. So what would that look like to have interactions with them that were meaningful without getting shut down and sort of written off as someone who's from Sweden?
So, and chime in with what you think too, but I mean, one of the things that I heard a lot from these guys is a common story about not fitting in high school, feeling quite alienated, being let down by teachers, being bullied, etc., and then finding a space in Silicon Valley where they felt like they fit in. And then they started adopting all of these habits of all these people who were accepting to them. And that's a really common story. And I think there is this kind of idea amongst people in Silicon Valley that it is a safe haven for people like us, whatever that means. So I do think that it actually does start, not to sort of punt the question, but I hear it all the time. It's a really common story, and I think but creating something that is more welcoming and supportive of a certain kind of guy in particular. This also ties, it's not just like tech bros, right? Like we also are seeing this with like the rise of like the incel movements and toxic masculinity, that I think there is a conversation to be had about, are we letting down men, not to excuse bad behavior, not to excuse fascism or, you know, all of that, all bad stuff, but are we at the very early stages of people's lives letting men down and creating this really toxic outcome?
But I mean, I guess to come back against that, like, is it really our duty to be nicer to the tech bros? I mean, like Mark Zuckerberg literally talked about wanting to kill the media. You know, in the latest Facebook memoir, I don't know if anyone's read it, Careless People by Sarah Wynne Williams, he talked about wanting to kill the media. Why should we be nice to them?
I think it's important to differentiate between the capitalists that control the companies and the workers inside of those companies, right? Mark Zuckerberg, I think, should be in prison. But there are a lot of people that are enabling his work that I think need some form of engagement that is not necessarily hostile. Because, I mean, my grandmother would always say, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And it's not to mollycoddle these men, but it's to create friction in all of these narratives that they're just blindly adopting. That you are essentially trying to create I'll give you an example. When I was in Dubai at the Brian Johnson party, and they were all talking about how like they want to wait to have children until they can like essentially genetically engineer them. And I like pointed out like this sounds a lot like eugenics. And then somebody literally turned to me and said, "Why is that bad? That means good eugenics. Eugenics, good eugenics. Why would good genetics be bad?" And I literally had to sort of mansplain like what the Nazis did. And like the eugenics movements across all of Europe and the horrific things that did. And then he goes, "Oh, but like we won't do that. I just want to have a cool kid." And it's like, but you have to actually start to think about the other consequence of that. And it's like none of those conversations are actually happening. And you can confront people who are well-meaning but ignorant and naive in a way that they will then start to think about what they actually think and what they're doing.
Okay, I think, do we have time or are we wrapping up? Wrapping up, yes. I think we're going to wrap up. Thank you guys so much for coming. And we're around if you have more questions. We'll be in the bar. Thank you so much, Chris.